It's 9 o'clock, 11 p.m. here in Beirut. I'm Yalda Hakim. The headlines tonight. Donald Trump says the U.S. Navy will blockade the Strait of Hormuz after peace talks with Iran collapsed without a deal. The U.S. president claims Britain and NATO will help police the strait, but Sky News understands the UK won't have any involvement. One key sticking point, Israeli attacks on Lebanon continuing despite talks between the two nations set to take place in Washington this week.
Also tonight, breaking news, the Hungarian Prime Minister has conceded defeat in the election. It ends Viktor Orban's 16 years in power. And in the sport, big problems for Rory McIlroy in the final round of the Masters.
Good evening. After 21 hours of closed-door diplomacy, Donald Trump's response to the US-Iran talks was public and emphatic this afternoon, with the president vowing to blockade the Strait of Hormuz. The talks in Islamabad ended without agreement in the early hours of this morning. The US says Iran wouldn't agree to abandon its nuclear ambitions, and the Iranian side saying America had not earned their trust. The question now is what happens next. Coming up, we'll find out what the failure of those talks means for the region, and we'll ask how a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz would even work. But first, our international affairs editor Dominic Waghorn reports from Islamabad.
America's vice president left here with no breakthrough to show for his efforts. After marathon talks lasting almost 24 hours, he appeared early morning looking deflated and calling it a day.
The bad news is that we have not reached an agreement, and I think that's bad news for Iran much more than it's bad news for the United States of America.
It was, he said, the nuclear issue where things came unstuck.
We need to see an affirmative commitment that they will not seek a nuclear weapon, and they will not seek the tools that would enable them to quickly achieve a nuclear weapon. That is the core goal of the President of the United States, and that's what we've tried to achieve through these negotiations.
The news from Islamabad prompted a furious reaction back in Washington and a threat from President Trump to escalate this war yet further, with the US naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, which is already shut by Iran. It raises the spectre of markets plunging with the open tomorrow and clashes at sea. But speaking on a US news channel, the president claimed NATO allies will be helping clear the strait.
We have highly sophisticated underwater minesweepers, which are the latest and the greatest, but we're also bringing in more traditional minesweepers. And so I understand is the UK and a couple of other countries are sending minesweepers.
The talks here were historic and serious, the highest level face-to-face US negotiations with Iran since its revolution in the 70s. The Iranians were sounding more conciliatory than the Americans, saying some progress had been made.
On some issues, we actually reached mutual understanding, but there was a gap over 2 or 3 important issues, and ultimately the talks didn't result in an agreement.
Pakistani mediators say the diplomacy is not over yet.
We hope that the two sides continue with the positive spirit to achieve durable peace and prosperity for the entire region and beyond. It is imperative that the parties continue to uphold their commitment to ceasefire.
There's now a frantic effort by many other nations to help put the diplomacy back on track. There is so much at stake. A resumption in hostilities is now more than possible, but for the Americans, the challenge is that the use of force has failed to solve the Iran problem, its nuclear issue, and its control now, the Strait of Hormuz, in 6 weeks of war. So why should it now? Talks here may have foundered, but clearly made some progress. There is a chance of building on that, but not if the US is embarking on yet more escalation, this time at sea. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News, Islamabad.
Well, Sky News understands that the UK will not be involved in the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, despite what you heard from Donald Trump there in Dominic's report. Let's go straight to our political correspondent, Lucy McDade, who joins us live now from Westminster. And Lucy, I mean, the MOD has come out and basically contradicted Donald Trump.
Yeah, exactly that, really. So we had these two comments from the US president this afternoon. One saying that multiple countries would be involved in his threat of a blockade. The other saying that the UK specifically will be sending minesweepers to the region. So we understand the government has categorically ruled out any involvement in a blockade. But I think it's important to note for them there is a distinction between getting involved in a blockade and assisting with the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. So the Prime Minister and his Defence Secretary John Healey have been saying for a number of weeks that mine hunting systems, anti-drone capabilities are already in the region, potentially for use when it is safe to go in and help escort ships through the strait. They have always made clear, though, that they will not be involved in possible escalation. They will only get involved when freedom of navigation has been restored. Sarah Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, is so far the only other political leader to weigh in after these Trump comments today, saying the PM should rule out the UK joining Donald Trump's latest escalation in his, what I quote, idiotic war. The Prime Minister today has spoken to the French President, Emmanuel Macron. We don't know whether that call came before or after these latest comments from Trump, but they reiterated the importance of reopening the strait, but in a safe way where freedom of navigation is restored. Of course, the longer this effective blockade goes on, the worse the domestic impact here, and that's why it's crucial for the government to be seen at the very front of diplomatic efforts to work on these plans, which it very much is trying to do. We're seeing the impact on petrol prices, diesel prices, and increasing warnings now that the long-term effect will be on food prices as well. Donald Trump has continued to criticise the UK today, again comparing Keir Starmer to Neville Chamberlain, saying NATO is shameful. We saw the Health Secretary Wes Streeting speak to Sky News earlier. He called Donald Trump's language incendiary, provocative, outrageous. We are seeing at the end of a week where this government has strengthened its rhetoric. The relationship has changed between the UK and the United States. So the government worried about international politics and relations here, but also the continued domestic effect that this conflict is continuing to have.
Lucy, thank you so much for bringing us up to date there. Now, earlier I spoke to Rear Admiral Joe Sestak, former Deputy Chief of US Naval Operations. He says the United States' poor planning to clear the Strait of Hormuz can be dangerous unless there is a deal. Just have a listen.
You got to know how it's going to end before you begin. And the fact that we didn't think that they were going to make a chokehold on the Straits of Hormuz, the largest asymmetric weapon, seems inane, and particularly inane, because we are at the worst possible moment of our mine-sweeping capability. We have the old 53 helicopters that used to tow equipment to clear mines are being decommissioned, can't use them. We are down to 4 40-year-old that we won't use Avenger class, old technologies. We are just now bringing on 3 ships that have some unmanned capability. But to go into that strait and begin to think you can clear it, I think is very dangerous unless you have a deal, unless there's peace, because there are missile cities in those islands there in the straits. They have tunnels within them that they move anti-ship cruise missiles out, take a pop at us, and go back in. They have 5,000 to 6,000 mines, even if you get the first 200 or 300, 400 that they lay by fishing boats. You're going to have to go back in and do it again. No, we didn't think through this. Someone made a decision, and someone said, I can't even tell you what my real objective is. It's gone all the way from regime change to erasing a civilization, all the way over to we want a deal. And I think without that, piss poor planning gives piss poor execution if you don't even know what the objective is.
That was Rear Admiral Joe Sestak speaking to me earlier. Now, a key sticking point in the negotiations, at least for Iran, are the Israeli attacks on Lebanon. More than 2,000 people have reportedly been killed in a little over a month. Talks between Israel and Lebanon are set to begin in Washington on Tuesday. Our international correspondent Anna Magne has the latest from Tel Aviv.
Benjamin Netanyahu has paid a visit to Israeli forces fighting in southern Lebanon. saying that Israel had managed to reshape the Middle East, that its enemies were on the back foot, congratulating them for their achievements, but saying that there is more work still to be done. Now, it is extraordinary to see the Prime Minister on Lebanese soil as though it is his own. Israel and Lebanon do not have diplomatic relations. Lebanon does not recognize the state of Israel. Technically, they are still at war, and no Israeli citizen would be allowed to cross from northern Israel into Lebanon. And there we have the Prime Minister in what he calls the security zone in the south of the country. That is effectively an occupation, an occupied area, occupied by Israeli forces. And that does not bode well for the beginning of direct talks next week in Washington, D.C. Initially, those will be held at ambassadorial level. The Lebanese and Israeli ambassadors to the United States meeting on Tuesday under the mediation of the United States. And this will be a long process. They are expected then only to talk about the announcement of a ceasefire and the process of disarming Hezbollah and bringing about peace between the two countries. And if those talks go well, you can expect more senior government ministers to be involved. But disarming Hezbollah will be a very, very complicated process. Hezbollah has already been threatening the Lebanese government with disruption, potentially civil war, if it kowtows to Israel in these negotiations. And it does not really appear as though Israel's Prime Minister has his heart in seeing peace come to Lebanon. If he feels that the Lebanese government is not able to disarm Hezbollah, it is likely that he will continue along this military path, not least because back home it means he escapes the pressure of the various trials, criminal trials that he is facing on corruption charges, and the question over the massive security failings around October the 7th that he has delayed investigating because of the security arrangement. Interesting that no talk was really made of the ceasefire in Lebanon in relation to what came out of the failed peace talks in Islamabad, the nuclear agenda seeming to be the stumbling point there rather than the ceasefire in Lebanon. Suffice to say, those Israeli strikes continue in the south of the country. 11 people killed this Sunday in Israeli airstrikes.
Diana Magnay reporting there from Tel Aviv, and Diana was talking about the negotiations and talks that are going to take place in Washington between Israel and Lebanon to try and come to some kind of resolution to the ongoing bombardment that is taking place across this country, especially in the south of this country. So we will continue our coverage over the course of the next few days. But Jonathan, back to you in the studio.
Great. Yalda, thank you. Let's bring you more now on the breaking news this hour. Hungary's Prime Minister has conceded defeat in an election which had a record turnout. It ended Viktor Orban's 16 years in power. Ivor Bennett joins us now from Budapest. Ivor, just explain how significant this is.
Well, this is a really, really significant moment, not just for Hungary, but for Europe and for much of the world, because of what Viktor Orban represents. His brand of illiberal democracy that he's ruled Hungary with for the last decade and a half, as you say, has made him a poster boy for right-wing populism. It's won him the support of the likes of Donald Trump, who sees him as a bastion of conservative Christian nationalism, as a barrier to the spread of liberalism in the heart of Europe. For Vladimir Putin, he's a disruptor in the heart of Europe, who is constantly stymieing the EU's support of Ukraine, its attempts to punish Moscow over its invasion of its neighbour 4 years ago. So for both of them, this is a huge setback, but Europe will be celebrating tonight because this permanent thorn, persistent thorn in their side has finally been removed. The problem child of Europe, a problem no more. There were fears that Viktor Orban wouldn't go quietly, that he wouldn't accept the result, but I think think the scale of his projected defeat tonight, or projected scale of his defeat, has left him with no option but to accept it. With around 80% of the vote counted, the opposition TISA party is on course to win 137 seats in that building there, Hungary's parliament, a stunning parliament building, giving them not just a majority but a super majority, more than 2/3 control, meaning that they can undo everything that Orban's Fidesz party has done. That's why he's conceded defeat, meaning the next Prime Minister will be Peter Magyar, a former Orban insider and loyalist turned rival. Have a listen to what Viktor Orban has said in his concession.
Good evening, everyone. My dear friends, the result of the election, while not complete, is understandable and clear. The result of the election is painful for us, but clear. Voters did not give us the responsibility and ability to govern. I have congratulated the victorious party.
And I would tell us more about Peter Magyar and what it is about him that has drawn so many people towards his policies in what was a record turnout.
Yeah, that's right. That's part of the story, actually. I think the turnout, unprecedented levels of people voting, some people waiting an hour and a half in line to cast their vote. And that tells the story of people just so desperate for change here after a decade and a half of Orban rule. Peter Magyar, as I say, was a former Orban loyalist. He was a trained lawyer. He worked as a diplomat, an insider for the Fidesz movement. But he turned against Orban 2 years ago. He came from effectively nowhere, and in that time he's built a huge following, running on a platform, a positive platform of change, promising to repair the country, reduce corruption, boost the economy, fix public services, grow wages, restore democratic checks and balances, restore press freedom, restore the independence of the judiciary, which in turn would bring back and unlock the EU's frozen funds to help boost Hungary's economy, and promising to turn the country back towards the West. And it's that positive message of change that has really chimed with people. The vast majority of people we spoke to here over the past few days, in the run to the election at various rallies and also today outside polling stations, was that people were just so fed up with the corruption and the dwindling economy, the stagnating standard of living, that they're just so desperate for change, and the result shows that they have finally got it.
Well, a huge victory and remarkable scenes down on the banks of the Danube in Budapest. Ivor, for the moment, thank you. The breaking news: Viktor Orban ousted after 16 years as Hungarians flock to that pro-EU rival of his. Plenty more reaction, of course, throughout the evening here on Sky News. Sport for you in a moment as well, including how Manchester City increased the pressure on Arsenal at the top of the Premier League.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?
Perfect. Let's bring you some breaking news.
Being a Sky News presenter. I began by asking,
thank you so much,
trusting us to tell her story. The battle for number 10. Sky News has been given exclusive access. Let me give you a sneak peek. It was the day those present would never forget. Why did you decide to open up and tell your story?
I urge you not to look away. If Hamas hands the hostages over, they will end this conflict. The world has been watching.
Good to see you again.
How are you? Did she say how he was?
The conditions are awful.
The jets were ordered to come back. Historic day here today. How will you respond if India does launch airstrikes?
They'll be allowed to war.
I'm just going to put some body armor on. I'm Yelda Hakim.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist... Hi, darling.
Best rugby Sky News
is being a Sky News journalist. You said to people, I'm not coming back for more, but you have come back for more. Well, let's kick off and make a statement. What can our Prime Minister say to you to not impose tariffs? He's coming out! What more do you need?
Time for the sport. Here's Josh.
Perfect, thank you very much. A footballer's life is all about moving. I never had a problem with that because I was the one that was progressing in my football career.
The Crazy Gang's welcoming committee were making sure their new arrival enjoyed a warm welcome.
I'd had a small arthroscopy operation, and at that particular time there was a lot of clubs interested in me.
But in a last-minute twist, Wimbledon learned John Hartson would not be moving as Spurs.
John Hartson was last week tipped to be on his way across South London for £5 million. That seems a dead deal.
I don't want to do any more medicals, to be honest.
I can't pass a medical because of this knee.
A downbeat John Hartson was rushed out of Ibrox today, having been given the worst possible news.
We did not believe he was at the correct fitness at that particular time to go straight into the Champions League.
Very seldom you see a player in the building walking around at a club and the deal isn't done.
I'm starting to question myself. I'm starting to think, well, where do I go from here?
The best medical he ever filed.
I knew about his injuries, but that didn't matter to me because I think John had played 20 consecutive games for Coventry.
I was going to an absolute giant in Celtic Football Club.
Another season, another club for John Hartson.
So I've proved that my knee's fine and my fitness is good.
This was my complete say. I think he wanted to prove his fitness, and I think he wanted to prove Rangers wrong.
And here's Hartson!
Celtic fans hold John in the highest regard.
Incredible ceremony.
Celtic Football Club, to me, is a very special place.
These are the two strikers that have grabbed George Graham's eye, and at quite a cost. John Hartson, the teenager, arrives at Highbury in return for a cheque to the tune of £2.5 million.
It's just brilliant for me, it's just a dream come true really to come to a club as big as Arsenal.
A lot of my career I've moved around. When you get offered to go and sign for big clubs, a footballer's life is all about moving and, resettling, but I never had a problem with that. I went to Luton at 16 on a YTS scheme, progressed, and there was quite a few clubs interested in me at that time.
It's just a new start for me, I just got to start fresh and just perhaps show people, what I can do.
I had 2 great years at Arsenal. They bid £2.5 million, which was a British teenage transfer record at the time.
He was bought for a certain part of the team, a more physical side. By the way, how good was he in the air? We were good at set pieces, and long throws, and that's what John was fantastic at. In out-and-out 9, that's exactly what John was.
Arsene, this way, please.
Arsene Wenger came in, and I remember
Some tonight's other main stories now. More than 200 people are feared dead after the Nigerian military carried out an airstrike on a market. It happened on Saturday evening in Jili Market in Yobe State, near the border with Borno State. The jet was reportedly on the trail of Boko Haram fighters. A man has been charged with murder after the fatal stabbing of 21-year-old Finbar Sullivan in London's Primrose Hill on Tuesday. Oluyewada Malola Ugan Yan Kinu, who is 27 and from Enfield, will appear in court tomorrow. The Met says the investigation is ongoing. We're going to take a quick look at the weather now.
You're looking happy.
Well, the forecast looks good.
So you've sorted the travel insurance then?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors Sky News weather.
The next few days will bring showers or more prolonged rain, but later next week there are signs of something more settled and warmer. Most places will start fine tomorrow, if a little chilly, with a patchy rural frost. There'll be just a few showers around, mainly for exposed coasts. Showers will develop more widely through the morning, but there'll be sunny spells as well. Expect some heavy showers with hail and the odd rumble of thunder possible. Temperatures will remain near average, but it should feel more pleasant with lighter winds than the weekend. Now, the afternoon will bring further showers, locally heavy, but they'll become more scattered in the south and west by the evening. And on to Tuesday, it'll start mainly fine, but cloud and rain will move in from the southwest to affect western parts. Much of eastern England and northern and eastern Scotland will stay dry until after sunset.
All Clear Travel Insurance proudly sponsors Sky News weather.
You're with Sky News. Coming up next, all the highlights from Sunday morning with Trevor Phillips.
We're trying to see as much as we can. We're in an area that's just been reclaimed Mr. Zuma, Sky News. People are directly protesting. The whole neighborhood is rallied around her.
It's been impenetrable to journalists over the last 2 years of war in Sudan.
I've been waiting for this for 2 years. It doesn't feel like a big homecoming.
It was never going to be pretty. War isn't pretty.
Welcome to Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. When Churchill described a great power of his time as a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma, he was talking about Russia. But today, that memorable phrase might just as accurately be applied to the paradox that is the United States. On the one hand, Artemis II brought together over a dozen nations, including Germany, Saudi Arabia, and South Korea, under American leadership, so that astronauts could boldly go where no man has gone before. A fantastic achievement. At the same time, the White House walked into a diplomatic cul-de-sac in the Middle East, allowing its nemesis Iran to gain complete control of the Strait of Hormuz, alienated its allies in the Gulf. It's a mess. Its people demonstrate under the slogan, "No Kings," yet they're preparing to roll out the red carpet for the descendant of the monarch they fought a war to get rid of. America is a nation of immigrants, many of whom want to reduce immigration to as near zero as possible, and elected a president largely because that's what he said he'd do. I could go on. But what Churchill actually said was that Russia is a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma, but perhaps there is a key. That key is Russian national interest. While other occupants of the White House may have had better manners, all American leaders are in the end driven by what they consider to be America's national interests. Bush, Obama, Biden all consistently said that we can't depend on America's security guarantee forever. Those who hope that things will change in 3 years' time stand to be disappointed. Donald Trump is not an aberration. Don't forget, America chose him. Not once, but twice. How many times do we have to be told? Let's get some immediate reaction from the government here to the news from Islamabad. West Streeting, what's your reaction to the overnight news from Islamabad?
Well, it's obviously disappointing that we haven't yet seen a breakthrough in negotiations and an end to this war in Iran that is a sustainable one. But as ever in diplomacy, you're failing until you succeed. So while these talks may not have ended in success, that doesn't mean there isn't merit in continuing to try. And clearly, when you look at the impact of the war in Iran on this country, on other countries around the world who have no part in this war, it is in all of our interests for there to be a breakthrough and an end to this war.
As long as these talks go on, there's nothing moving in the Strait of Hormuz. That pushes up prices for us. Potentially, it will lead to shortages. Well, what are we doing to prepare for an extended conflict?
Well, that's one of the reasons why the Foreign Secretary has been convening allies in the region and further afield to see what we can do to get goods and trade moving through the Strait of Hormuz. It's not easy, it's not straightforward. And, you know, right across the economy, right across our public services, we're continuing to keep under close review the impact of that disruption to prices, to supply chains. And, you know, this is very much a watching brief.
Mr. Trump said this morning that he is now embarking on clearing the Strait of Hormuz. What does that mean? Do we know?
I'm not sure it's ever clear. I think as we've just seen...
You mean Mr. Trump is not clear?
Over the course of the last week, President Trump has said some pretty bold, in yes, minister language, incendiary, provocative, outrageous things on social media. I think we've all come to learn that you judge President Trump through what he does, not just what he says. And ultimately, the only way in which we're going to clear this situation up is to reach agreement with Iran, one that puts nuclear weapons beyond its ambitions and reach, because we've chosen very clearly, and I think it's the right decision, not to join the war in Iran. It's not a war of our choosing. We've never been in any doubt about the nature of the Iranian regime and the threat that they pose to their allies in the to our allies in the region, to the UK and our interests. So there's no doubt about that. What we do need to see is an agreement that brings an end to this war and also an end to Iran's nuclear ambitions.
President Trump, bold, incendiary, inflammatory, outrageous. Is that the government's view?
Well, you've seen some of the things that President Trump has said in the last week. You've seen some of the criticisms he's levelled at this country. The Prime Minister has sought, throughout the time they've both been in office simultaneously, to influence effectively, to make sure we're leveraging the bilateral relationship. The difference of agreement with Iran has undoubtedly strained things with the Trump administration, but on so many other things, our interests as the UK and the US are intertwined. We are old and close friends, and we've got a shared outlook as democratic countries, and we've got shared security interests. So all of that work, all of that partnership continues to go on. And the point I'm making is you have to distinguish between some of the rhetoric, which people might find shocking, and then the reality. There were lots of people who went to bed early this week with President Trump threatening the end of the Iranian civilization, wondering what on earth would happen overnight, and woke up to a very different picture the next morning. So that's the point we're making. There's a difference between what he says and what he does. And as a government, and certainly as the Prime Minister, has kept level-headed, cool, calm leadership that I think the public have appreciated and respected. I don't think there are many prime ministers alive today, former prime ministers, who would have made the same judgment about keeping the UK out of the war in Iran. That was the right judgment. You contrast that with Badenoch and Farage, who were only too quick to want to jump in with Trump. Then they realised it was unpopular. Then they did the hokey-cokey and marched out again. And that's the contrast I'm drawing, is between the cool, calm, level-headed and serious leadership of the Prime Minister versus our domestic opponents, and also some of the rhetoric coming out of Washington.
But serious point here, you're making the case that we are close to the United States. I want to come back to this question of our relationship in a moment. But is it characteristic of that close relationship for a government minister to describe the president's words as incendiary, inflammatory, outrageous, and now shocking? Is that the best way to make that relationship work, to say that in public?
No, I'm talking about the reaction that people have had in this country and elsewhere.
You've just said the president himself, his words were incendiary, inflammatory, outrageous and shocking.
As I say, Trevor, that has been the reaction to people in this country and elsewhere to things the president has said.
And your own reaction.
And I'm drawing the distinction.
Including your own reaction.
And I'm drawing the distinction between what President Trump says and how he says it, and then what he does. And the contrast with the cool, calm, level-headed leadership that the Prime Minister has shown in keeping us out.
I'm not trying to do something odd here or any gotcha. I'm just very interested, because it's very rare for a minister to share his or her own personal reaction. And what I am guessing is that the words you've used describe your own personal reaction to President Trump's threat to destroy civilization. Am I understanding that properly?
Well, look, Trevor, I don't think it's controversial to say that posting on social media a threat to end the Iranian civilization is really, and let's use yes minister language, really quite extraordinary.
I'd rather you didn't. I'd rather you just gave. I'd rather you use West-Streeting language.
But the point I'm making is, and because this is part of the world in which the UK and the government has to navigate now with this particular American administration, you do have to distinguish between what President Trump says and how he says it, and then what he does. Because so much of the political conversation, and and I was being asked earlier this week about what the US administration was saying in earlier interviews, And what would the UK government reaction be if President Trump were to? And this is the point, isn't it? You have to distinguish between what he says, how he says it, which people may find outrageous, people may find out incendiary, and then what he does. And the Prime Minister's whole approach has been about making sure two things. Firstly, the UK doesn't get dragged into this war. It wasn't of our choosing.
We've been through that.
And secondly, to protect our country as best we can.
So your
from the
view is,
consequences
as they say in the United States, take the president seriously, but don't take him
literally. I think that's correct.
Is it a matter of concern to you that we, the United Kingdom, are playing no part in these talks that took place in Islamabad and perhaps will carry on elsewhere?
Well, obviously, we talk regularly to the US administration. The Prime Minister spoke to President Trump only the other day. We obviously have a strong historic bilateral relationship with Pakistan. Well,
we're not in the room, are we?
No, well, these are talks between the US and Iran convened by Pakistan.
Chagos, is that deal dead?
No, look, the United States is going through its own process at the moment, and it is fair to say there has been a shift in position in Washington. We've been clear throughout that the objective is to make sure we secure the Chagos Islands for the long term in British and American interests. I think there are lots of people in the US administration who understand what we're trying to achieve, who support that objective. We're working with the Americans to try and resolve that, because we've been clear that we wouldn't act without the Americans, because this also concerns their interests as well.
Lots of people, but not the president. Are you a bit cross that Mr. Farage appears to have had more influence on this matter than the Prime Minister?
Well, I think it is fair to say we've seen two things. We've seen extraordinary hypocrisy on the part of the Conservatives, who were also negotiating the Chagos deal. They understood when they were in government the importance of this and swiftly changed their tune on the other side. And as for Mr. Farage, the extent to which that man, that plastic patriot, is prepared to fly to Washington on a regular basis to slag off his own country to American audiences, I think is utterly shameful, and why we should take his claims to be a patriot with a pinch of salt.
The Prime Minister pronounced himself this week fed up with the actions of Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin. Now, our relationship with the Americans is, as you've already been saying this morning, important. Mr. Trump has derided our aircraft carriers as toys. Is the United States still our closest ally?
Yes.
Is it still our indispensable ally?
Yes.
So whatever the United States does and whatever sound we hear from Mr. Trump, we are still essentially, we may speak truth to power and all of that, but we are still going to be involved with the United States at the level that we have been.
Yeah, look, this is the relationship with the United States is broad, it's deep, it's historic, and it has weathered differences of opinion over many decades, many presidents and many prime ministers. This is no different.
Wes Streeting, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you.
I bet right now you often find yourself asking why. Why was a certain decision taken? Why did something happen? Why did they say or do that? I'm Neil Patterson, and it's my job as a journalist to find out why. Just explain why.
It's a difficult one.
Well, I mean, it's massive.
It's a very, very severe situation.
So if you want to make sense of this complicated world, Sky News' new podcast, This Is Why, is your daily fix. One story every day, and we can find out why together. Listen and follow wherever you get your podcasts.
Mayhem in the Middle East, rippling in America's West.
Get back! Get back!
The resolve of these protesters is now being seriously tested. I saw police being forced or pushing young men and women to the ground as they almost 100 arrests.
None of this is a peaceful protest.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. How are you feeling, you?
I am angry. It is an anti-woman agenda.
Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support, but it's nasty out there.
Anybody else?
Should the Defence Secretary and the Vice...
Wait, what country are you
from the UK?
Okay, we don't give a crap about your opinion and your reporting. Why don't you go back to your country where you have a major migrant problem?
President Biden, do you trust President Xi? President Biden says that this meeting went well. He said real progress was made on a whole host of issues. Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
There's no doubt that Kamala Harris and her team are harnessing the power of social media. Do you think Kamala is brat?
Kamala's brat.
Are you scared?
Yeah, we were scared. It was terrible. Strong wind, building tearing down.
As them say, our God works, so we can't do nothing.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. Sky News, get the full story first. Free wherever you get your news. Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?
Perfect. Let's bring you some breaking news.
Being a Sky News presenter.
I began by asking,
Thank you so much.
trusting us to tell her story. The battle for number 10. Sky News has been given exclusive access. Let me give you a sneak peek. It was the day those present would never forget. Why did you decide to open up and tell your story? I urge you not to look away. If Hamas hands the hostages over, they will end this conflict. The world has been watching. Good to see you again. How are you? Did she say how he was?
The conditions are awful.
The jets were ordered to come back.
Historic day here today. How will you respond if India does launch airstrikes?
They'll be all out to war.
I'm just going to put some body armor on. I'm Gelda Hakim.
Reform will be hoping to be the big winners in many of those elections, and the party's Home Affairs spokesperson, Zia Yusuf, is with me now. Good morning.
Good morning.
We'll come to elections in a moment, but can I first ask you about Chagos Island? Your leader's delighted, I think, by the fact that the government seems to have given up on the Chagos Island deal because the Americans won't buy it. Is it right to say that we now know that when Nigel Farage campaigned on the slogan "Take Back Control," what he actually meant was take back control from Brussels so you could pass it to Washington DC?
Well, the first thing to say is the notion that the United Kingdom should voluntarily cede sovereign territory and then spend tens of billions of pounds of British taxpayer money inexplicably leasing it back is beyond insane. Equally as insane, and I couldn't believe my ears when I heard this, was the Tory party this week trumpeting that they had somehow brought about this result. It was only a few years ago that James Cleverly, as Foreign Secretary of the Conservative government, began negotiations to, guess what, cede Chagos' sovereign territory, and did 11 rounds of negotiations. So as much as this was a Starmer catastrophe, thankfully averted, as with so many Starmer catastrophes, it's simply continuing things that the Tories began.
But be fair, the Tories in opposition under Kemi Badenoch have tried to introduce legislation that would block this deal.
In opposition? We've got to judge them on what they did in 14 years in government.
She wasn't the boss then.
Well, look, in the end, people watching this programme can make their own minds up. But I think it's perfectly reasonable to say, what did this party do in their 14 years in government? And not only did they not do the things that they said that they would do, they did the very opposite. It was also just this week that Kemi Badenoch is talking about reducing welfare spending in order to invest in our military, when it was the Tories who took defence spending down from 2.7% of GDP down to 2.4% GDP. Look, Trevor, Kemi Badenoch and the Tory party are shameless arsonists promising to rebuild your house, having spent 14 years burning it to the ground.
So there's no point in me asking you my traditional question about the possibility of an accommodation with the Tories?
Probably be a bad use of time, Trevor.
Okay. let's talk about you then. One thing this morning, Richard Tice, it is being reported, has some trouble with the tax affairs of one of his companies. What is his position on that? Has he made a mistake? Has he done something wrong? Or is he just dismissing it?
So look, in my view, this is a non-story, but I will address it. So I've got two things I would say about it, right? So number one, the tax lawyer, who, by the way, is a veteran Labour activist, by the way, that's a fact. He himself said, the person who's been posting about this, that Richard Tice has not committed tax evasion nor tax avoidance. That would be the first point I make. And the second point I would make is that what's also seems clear to me, and I'm obviously not a tax lawyer, but it is clear to me that any tax that would have not been paid or underpaid by the company paying the dividend in this case would have been overpaid by Richard himself in the form of income tax. So it does look like HMRC netted off to the same.
So the basic problem is that he should have paid some tax before sending dividends to a company abroad, but he didn't do it. Is that
it looks like the company itself, rather than Richard personally, made what I think is quite a minor administrative error. But as I said, Richard, in receiving the dividends, would have ended up paying income tax on all of it. So in the end, I think HMRC have netted out to the same thing. It was years ago. Look, we're going into election period. The Sunday papers are coming after senior reform figures. It's not a surprise, but this is a non-story.
All right, let's talk about reform and the elections coming. You are widely credited with trying to and effectively professionalising in part in your former role as chair. You set up this, or the party set up a competition in which voters can get their energy costs met by the party. And there's a street in north of London, north of England, I beg your pardon, where somebody won this competition and the whole street's having its energy costs paid. Are you embarrassed by the fact that reform looks likely to be investigated by the police for what used to be called treating, or as we now know it, bribery and corruption of voters?
I think the people making such a report should be embarrassed, Trevor. Look, it was only a few weeks ago, remember, during the Gorton and Denton parliamentary by-election, that people reported reform to the police for some imprint on a leaflet, and the police looked at it and said, this is nonsense, threw it out, right? So, no, not at all. Look, I know for a fact, we had some outstanding lawyers, multiple lawyers actually look at all of this. We're extremely comfortable with our position.
They might be wrong. Greater Manchester Police apparently are reviewing it. The last time an MP was forced to resign for treating, as it's called, was June 1911, Sir Seymour King, who was the MP for Kingston on Hull. You know what he was offered voters? He offered them coal, or to put it another way, he offered to pay their energy bills.
Trevor.
Doesn't that worry you at all?
While I appreciate the history lesson, I really do, this is a non-story. If there are any serious repercussions from this, have me back on and we'll talk about it. This is a non-story.
All right. Well, but let's talk about what is definitely a story. Your leader has dropped his support for the two-child benefit cap. He's now for keeping the pensioners' triple lock, and he's welcoming any Tory MP who happens to be strolling by. Is Nigel Farage going soft?
Well, the first two things you just said are correct. The third one is definitely not correct, I can tell you.
Have there been Tory MPs who wanted to join and you rejected them?
Of course. In the end, those are Nigel's decisions.
Name names.
Of course, I'm not going to name names. That would be a gross betrayal of confidence and would mean, for obvious reasons. But to address your point there, people know what Nigel stands for. Nigel has been making the same points consistently for decades, and he's been proven.
He's changed his mind on triple lock.
Trevor, he has been making the point about we need secure borders, about the fact that the country is being invaded. Do you remember that breaking point billboard that caused all manner of furore in this country? And as time has passed, it's turned out he's been absolutely correct. People know Nigel stands for secure borders. He stands for the ending of the invasion of this country. And in terms of protecting pensioners, we're not going to apologise for the fact that to the degree British people are going to be asked to make sacrifices, that cannot and must not happen in our view until we have done things like ending welfare payments for all foreign nationals. That hasn't happened. Ending this insane situation where you've got a Home Secretary declaring they're banning people while endless numbers of military-age men keep penetrating our border. And the only consequence for them, Trevor, the only consequence is free four-star hotel accommodation and free meals at the taxpayer expense.
Let me just dig the relevant point out of that answer, where you want to take me on to immigration, but I was asking you about the triple lock and the benefit cap. Are you saying that Nigel Farage is saying we're not going to interfere with the triple lock now, but when we have the opportunity, and we've done some other things, we think that is something that we might abandon?
No, that's not at all what we're saying.
You just said when you've dealt with some of these other benefit things, you implied cheats and so on, then we can think about it.
Cheats.
Are you saying that in principle reform will keep the triple lock, will keep the two-child benefit cap.
Correct, both of those things. And the reason is because we have done
That's
a huge
not what
amount
you were
of
saying
work.
3 months ago.
We have done a huge amount of work, some of which you're going to hear about from us at a press conference tomorrow morning, just the start of this. A huge amount of work on hundreds of billions of pounds that can be saved in terms of taxpayer spending in the coming years.
Yeah, everybody says that.
Well, we're going to lay it out. And it's unacceptable that British pensioners, most of them have paid into the system their entire lives, it should be taken from them money so that they can live in dignity in old age, that we can fund foreign nationals. Trevor, £15 billion has been spent on foreign nationals just on universal credit alone over the last 18 months. Until that sort of thing is sorted, it is unconscionable to take money from Britain.
I'm hearing that Nigel Farage is getting his U-turns in first. Is he just turning into another Keir Starmer?
It's not a U-turn. At no point did Nigel pledge to scrap the triple lock. What he said was it was going to be under review. We have now done a huge amount of work. We've done a huge amount of work, and we've found enough savings to assure pensioners that we're not going to scrap.
That's such a Starmerite answer. Let's have another review.
We've done that work. That's why we've now committed to keeping the triple lock, Trevor. And you're going to hear, you will hear from us at a press conference. Me and Nigel giving a press conference tomorrow morning with a huge amount of money that is going to be saved.
All right. Dear Yusuf, thank you for your time this morning.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist... Hi, darling.
Beth Rigby, Sky News.
Is being a Sky News journalist. You said to people, I'm not coming back for more, but you have come back for more. Well, let's kick off. And make a statement. What can our Prime Minister say to you to not impose tariffs? He's coming out! What more do you need?
We're trying to see as much as we can.
We're in an area that's just been reclaimed.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News.
People are directly protesting.
The whole neighborhood is rallied around her.
It's been impenetrable to journalists over the last 2 years of war in Sudan.
I've been waiting for this for 2 years. It doesn't feel like a big homecoming.
It was never going to be pretty. War isn't pretty.
Tonight on The Wrap, after peace talks between the US and Iran collapse with no deal, the ceasefire looks to be in jeopardy. President Trump says the US Navy will blockade the Strait of Hormuz, while Tehran warns any military vessels approaching the vital waterway will be a violation and will be dealt with harshly. The US president claims Britain and NATO will help police the strait as America seeks to eliminate Iran's key source of leverage, impacting global oil prices. Also tonight, Hungary's opposition wins the election, ending Viktor Orban's 16 years in power, in an election closely watched by Washington and Moscow. We hear you. Ministers in Ireland try to stave off crippling fuel protests, which could bring down the government, as discontent at soaring prices spreads and some pumps run dry. England's Justin Rose shares the lead with Rory McIlroy in the final round of the Masters. We discuss the day's biggest stories with Annabel Denham, senior political commentator at the Daily Telegraph, and Stephen Bush, associate editor and columnist for the Financial Times. Plus, a first look at the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers, including the Metro with the headline, Government Tackles Oil Crisis, referring to a ban on fried food for school dinners. Good evening, Annabel and Stephen. Welcome to you both. President Trump has vowed to blockade the Strait of Hormuz with the US Navy after negotiations with Iran failed. The talks in Islamabad ended without agreement. America saying Iran wouldn't agree to abandon its nuclear ambitions, and the Iranian side saying the United States had not earned their trust. Annabel, your thoughts?
Well, it doesn't look like we're any closer to lasting peace, does it, after that ceasefire was announced last week? Very troubling. And of course, the longer this goes on, the more cataclysmic it is for the economies, not just in the region, but across the globe.
Stephen?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have all that much to add, really, other than the fact that every day this goes on, it's worse for everyone else, and it looks like it's going on for a long time.
Well, the question now is what happens next? Will Britain be involved, and how would a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz even work? Our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, reports from Islamabad.
America's vice president left here with no breakthrough to show for his efforts. After marathon talks lasting almost 24 hours, he appeared early morning looking deflated and calling it a day.
The bad news is that we have not reached an agreement, and I think that's bad news for Iran much more than it's bad news for the United States of America.
It was, he said, the nuclear issue where things came unstuck.
We need to see an affirmative commitment that they will not seek a nuclear weapon, and they will not seek the tools that would enable them to quickly achieve a nuclear weapon. That is the core goal of the President of the United States, and that's what we've tried to achieve through these negotiations.
The news from Islamabad prompted a furious reaction back in Washington and a threat from President Trump to escalate this war yet further, with the US naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, which is already shut by Iran. It raises the spectre of markets plunging with the open tomorrow and clashes at sea. But speaking on a US news channel, the president claimed NATO allies will be helping clear the strait.
We have highly sophisticated underwater minesweepers, which are the latest and the greatest, but we're also bringing in more traditional minesweepers. And so I understand is the UK and a couple of other countries are sending minesweepers.
The talks here were historic and serious, the highest level face-to-face US negotiations with Iran since its revolution in the 70s. The Iranians were sounding more conciliatory than the Americans, saying some progress had been made.
On some issues, we actually reached mutual understanding, but there was a gap over 2 or 3 important issues, and ultimately the talks didn't result in an agreement.
Pakistani mediators say the diplomacy is not over yet.
We hope that the two sides continue with the positive spirit to achieve durable peace and prosperity for the entire region and beyond. It is imperative that the parties continue to uphold their commitment to ceasefire.
There's now a frantic effort by many other nations to help put the diplomacy back on track. There is so much at stake. A resumption in hostilities is now more than possible, but for the Americans, the challenge is that the use of force has failed to solve the Iran problem, its nuclear issue, and its control now, the Strait of Hormuz, in 6 weeks of war. So why should it now? Talks here may have foundered, but clearly made some progress. There is a chance of building on that, but not if the US is embarking on yet more escalation, this time at sea. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News, Islamabad.
Well, before we respond to that, let's just show you these images of the US Vice President J.D. Vance, who's just arrived at Andrews Joint Air Force Base in Maryland. This obviously having just returned from Islamabad. And just to tell you that we are expecting to see President Trump leaving Florida for Washington in the next hour or so. And we'll bring you those images and any comments that he may share when he arrives there. So we'll keep an eye across that. But those are the latest pictures of J.D. Vance, the Vice President, arriving back from Islamabad. So Annabelle and Stephen, that piece that we just saw there from Dominic Waghorn, clearly illustrating how the negotiations have broken down, even to the point of Iran now commenting on the further threats from Donald Trump today of this blockade.
Yeah, and the big picture for all of us here at home and everyone else in the wider world is that essentially the lesson that the Iranian regime has taken from this war is we've got to increase further the costs of this happening again, which for them means continuing to pursue their nuclear ambitions and continuing to have control over the Strait of Hormuz. Whereas, obviously, from the US perspective, Donald Trump wants to be able to say that he's won something from this, but also if at the end of this conflict, Iran does control the Strait of Hormuz and can use that as an economic weapon, the regime will actually be stronger than it was at the start of this process. And I think that dynamic means it's very hard to see how there's going to be some kind of negotiated arrangement to this, because the Republic of Iran can't back down. It's now an existential challenge for them. Donald Trump doesn't clearly wants it to be over, but he doesn't want to go down as a president who's been defeated militarily. So, yeah, it feels a resumption of hostilities after this 2 week ceasefire feels pretty inevitable.
Yeah. I mean, and we have had Donald Trump saying that, they've won the war no matter what happens now. They've already won. But, when we have these negotiations where the crux of the matter seems to be their nuclear ambitions of Iran, with Donald Trump saying nothing else matters apart from that, and Iran not wanting to voluntarily give that up, there's just no way that we can move forward.
No, I mean, the gap between the two, it just seemed too vast. And they went into those negotiations. Now, the fact that they lasted all of 21 hours, I think began to give people a little bit of hope that there might be some sort of agreement to come out of them. But in the end, J.D. Vance, and it's interesting, in fact, that the Vice President was the one who was sent to negotiate on America's behalf, given he has been quietly opposed to this. He has not been at Donald Trump's side, but nevertheless clearly coming back empty-handed. And this is a nightmare, as Stephen says, for Trump, because already this conflict is not popular in America, isn't popular among many members of the Republican Party, supporters of the Republican Party. The idea that America will have rushed into this and then come out in a worse position than it was before and have done nothing to dismantle Iran's nuclear ambitions will be a disaster for the US president.
Yeah, and also seemingly at the moment there's not much support for the blockade. Let's talk about how that affects us here in the UK and bring in our political correspondent Lucy McDade, who's in Downing Street for us. And Lucy, despite President Trump alluding to the fact that the UK would be helping in some way with the blockade, that definitely is not the case.
Yeah, absolutely. So this follows two separate comments made by the US president today. One, that numerous countries would be involved with that threat of a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. The second is where he specifically said the UK will be sending minesweepers to the region. Now, we understand that the prospect of getting involved with that blockade has been categorically ruled out by officials here. But when it comes to assisting with the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, helping ships take that passage through, the government has previously said that there are mine hunting systems already in the region, anti-drone capabilities should they be needed. The government sees there is a distinction between getting involved with the blockade, which has been ruled out, and assisting with the reopening of that passage, resuming the supply supply of oil and gas to countries across the world, including, of course, the UK. Talks are ongoing. Talks will be continuing this week even. But what the government has always maintained, Keir Starmer has said time and time and again, we are not involved in this war. Any action is in the interest of British self-defence. That is something that the Prime Minister reiterated in a call with the French President Emmanuel Macron this afternoon, both stressing that we would only get involved once the passage is safe and once freedom of navigation has returned. Why is it so critical for us here? Well, of course, we have already seen the impact that this effective closure is having on the cost of living, the price of petrol and diesel at the pumps, and now we are seeing warnings about the long-term impact when it comes to energy bills and also food prices. This is a government that has made the cost of living, bringing down the cost of living, its key priority. The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, was saying just today that she has to be honest with people, that this conflict will come at a cost to British families and businesses. I just want to end on something that the Prime Minister said in the Middle East earlier this week. For the very first time, a direct criticism of Donald Trump. He said he's fed up of seeing the impact of the US President's actions on British families and energy bills here. And I think there is no doubt this evening that in the corridors of Downing Street, those words will be muttered once again.
Lucy, thank you very much for that. Just want to bring you some breaking news now, and that is from US Central Command forces. They're saying that they'll begin implementing a blockade of all maritime traffic entering and exiting Iranian ports on April the 13th. In accordance with the President's proclamation. The blockade will be enforced impartially against vessels of all nations entering or departing Iranian ports and coastal areas, including all Iranian ports on the Arabian Gulf and Gulf of Oman. CENTCOM forces will not impede freedom of navigation for vessels transiting the Strait of Hormuz to and from non-Iranian ports. Additional information will be provided to commercial mariners through a formal notice prior to the start of the blockade. All mariners are advised to monitor notice to mariners broadcasts and contact US naval forces on bridge-to-bridge Channel 16 when operating in the Gulf of Oman and Strait of Hormuz approaches. So there, the official proclamation that the actual blockade will begin tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Annabelle.
Well, you can only imagine what's going to happen to global markets when they open tomorrow morning. It's going to be a disaster. Oil experts obviously already warning that a blockade will send prices up even further. The ramifications of this will be profound, and it will be a deeply unpopular move from the US president. And, you know, all of this just speaks to the fact that Iran has discovered it's got an extremely potent blackmail tool now at its disposal.
Iran always knew that, though, didn't they? I mean, this was the prediction. This was their bargaining chip.
This was their bargaining chip, yes. But, I mean, it's been so remarkably effective in forcing the US, or potentially forcing the US either into a major escalation, as we seem to be witnessing now, or into a climb down, neither of which are going to play well within America and with America's allies.
We've had this breaking news from US Central Command, which seems as if it is definitely going ahead. But do you think there might be some rowback? Is this not necessarily the point at which it happens?
I think the history of Trump's second term has been that he does something that is ill-advised, catastrophic to America's interests, catastrophic to America's allies, and then he tries to find a way to exit it. We saw that with Liberation Day and the tariffs, where US consumers were going to be liberated from the tyranny of buying things they wanted to buy at a lower price. He walked away from that having still done quite a bit of damage from the tariffs, but not as much as he threatened to, but also he was able to walk away from it. Whereas I think what makes this so unpredictable is we all know that what Donald Trump wants is to be able to walk away there going, this is the greatest victory in the history of the world. But we also can all see then it's very hard to see how he's going to get the greatest victory in the history of the world without either. So the reason to shut the whole of the strait off is that also hurts Iran's economy, whereas as it stood, the world economy was being hurt, but Iran was still getting some revenue via it. But his willingness, I think, to bear these huge costs, which will be hugely unpopular with the American people, it's really impossible to predict what he will do as he tries to find a way of going, there, I fixed it, and walk away from it.
What's so interesting is one of the justifications, or troubling for Trump, is one of the justifications for this conflict was nuclear disarmament. But a year ago, Trump was bragging about the role that Trump 1.0 had played in that, and to now...
Well, he said in June that he decimated all of their capabilities, and here we are, and that is still the issue.
Yes, exactly, and it's possibly the thorniest issue is that and the Strait of Hormuz, and how Trump is going to continue to defend action in this region on the grounds that it's vital that Iran never gets a nuclear weapon. And it's, a lot of it has been discussion around how imminent the threat is. Is it on America's doorstep? Is it on Europe's doorstep? It's just impossible to see how he sustains this narrative as the situation deteriorates further.
Well, J.D. Vance said of the negotiations that the Iranians had chosen not to accept our terms, including, commitment not to seek or develop nuclear weapons. The Iranians, on the other hand, they seem to be actually probably more optimistic about the negotiations. They seem to be a bit more positive.
Well, you can see why, and then ultimately, from their perspective, the central test of their military apparatus was, could this effectively leaderless model where you have all of your units spread out, they're all acting semi-autonomously, so it's much harder for US and Israeli airstrikes to take out your leadership. Could they successfully do this thing that they knew they potentially could, which was to use the Strait as a weapon of economic war? From their perspective, they now know they can. They also know that, yes, the Iranian regime has all sorts of problems, huge economic difficulties, but they do not have the political constraints that a democracy like the United States, which has elections in November, has. And so they, I think, of course, will rightly feel like, look, there is a path out of this for us. We just have to we just have to not lose. That's how smaller countries beat superpowers, is they just avoid defeat for long enough for politics in the superpower to shut down the problem for them.
One of the negotiations, Mohammed Bagir Ghalibaf, said that his country had showed goodwill to the American delegation and that they were making quite good progress. I mean, that was his reading of the situation. But he did also say that if you fight, we will fight. And if you come forward with logic, we will deal with logic.
Well, this is all part of the propaganda war, isn't it? And the blame game that follows the breakdown of the talks. Neither side are going to want to be perceived as the ones who are responsible for the continuation of this conflict, when every country in the world has some interest in its swift resolution. And we will just simply continue to see this as the situation escalates even further. In terms of how America can claw back some credibility on this, I suppose the messaging will be that they have managed to, in some ways, degrade Iran militarily. They've, of course, assassinated the Ayatollah. They've hit key Iranian targets. But there hasn't been any great uprising like we saw at the start of the year when Donald Trump then promised that the cavalry were coming and they never arrived. And I think the hope among the Israelis and the Americans was that their actions in Iran would precipitate some sort of revolt, and that hasn't happened. So it's very difficult to see a way forward.
Let's take a look at the front of the I newspaper and how it affects the UK. The I has the headline, Inflation Warning for Britain as Trump threatens shipping blockade in revenge for failed peace talks. We'll have a full rundown of the newspapers at hour. Now, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has conceded defeat after what he described as a painful election result following 16 years in power. Hungary's opposition leader, Peter Magyar, said Orban congratulated him in a phone call following the vote, which was being seen as the most significant election in Europe this year, with the results watched closely by both Washington and Moscow. Well, tonight, Sir Keir Starmer congratulated Peter Magyar, hailing his victory as an historic moment, not only for Hungary, but for European democracy. Let's bring in our correspondent, Ivor Bennett, who's in Budapest for us. And Ivor, I've seen the crowd behind you. I mean, it seems as everybody's on the streets of Budapest. This really is an historic moment.
Yeah, that's right, Gillian. A truly historic moment. Viktor Orban, as you say, conceding defeat here within 3 hours of polls closing, actually, quite unexpected. And that means the end of his 16 years in power here in Hungary. I think there was an expectation, actually, that he wouldn't go quietly, having built a system that really made it much harder for anyone to beat his party. But I think the scale of his defeat here, the projected scale of it, is so comprehensive that he had no choice but to accept defeat. Because the opposition TISA party, led by Peter Magyar, who was a former Orban loyalist and insider, has won a supermajority in that building across the river there. That is Hungary's parliament. The supermajority means he has 2/3 control of parliament. It means he can undo all the things that the Fidesz ruling party has done, and the dismantling of democratic checks and balances, those can be put back in place. Peter Magyar, Hungary's next Prime Minister, is addressing the crowd here on the banks of the Danube. You can't see him, he's about a couple of 100 metres away. Thousands of people here, and he's told the crowd, we have reclaimed our country. There's a real party atmosphere here. Down on the streets, champagne corks are popping, flags are waving. There's a mixture of relief, disbelief, joy as well, unbridled joy. A lot of people, young people, have only known Viktor Orban as their leader, and they really feel they have reclaimed their future. And I think there's also surprise, as I say, that Viktor Orban did indeed concede. Let's have a listen to what he said.
Good evening, everyone. My dear friends, the result of the election, while not complete, is understandable and clear. The result of the election is painful for us, but clear. Voters did not give us the responsibility and ability to govern. I have congratulated the victorious party.
How different are Viktor Orban and Peter Magyar in terms of politics? How far removed is Magyar from the liberal democracy style of Orban?
Well, he's a real contrast to Orban's illiberal democracy, for sure. He is still on the right of centre. He's still a conservative, but he is pro-Europe, he is anti-corruption, and that is a breath of fresh air after a decade and a half for many Hungarians here. He really campaigned on this platform of change. It was a positive campaign. He was saying he wanted to boost the economy, he wanted to reintroduce rule of law, the independence of the judiciary. He wanted to repair failing public services, restore a decent healthcare, restore standards of living, lower cost of living as well. All of these kind of domestic issues really chimed with people's politics here and people's needs. They were desperate for change, fed up with the Orban government. And Orban, of course, was campaigning on a platform of fear, really. He was warning that a vote for the opposition would mean war. He was saying that Magyar was an agent of Ukraine, an agent of Brussels that would drag Hungary into war with Russia. People did not believe that. They have voted for change, and it really is a stark contrast to Orban. And its implications for not just Hungary, but for Europe as a whole and for the rest of the world, because of what Orban represents. His brand of a liberal democracy made him a poster boy for right-wing populism, and this was seen as a referendum of that whole concept, and this result is seen as a comprehensive rejection of it, a setback for the likes of Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. Tonight in Europe, I think, in Brussels as well, really.
Ina, thank you so much for that. The signal just held out in the end there. Thanks for that. Well, let's see how this news has been received in Europe in particular. The President of the European Union, Ursula von der Leyen, posted on X saying Hungary has chosen Europe. Europe has always chosen Hungary. Together, we are stronger. A country reclaims its European path. The Union grows stronger. Great news for Europe, Annabelle, but not so much for Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. They've lost a key ally in Europe, haven't they?
And how extraordinary that is, that both Trump and MAGA and Vladimir Putin were supportive of Orban here, that he was able to unite those two massive figures in global politics. And he was seen in Moscow really as their mule in the EU, and he was seen as a sort of leading light of the liberal wing of right-wing populism that swept across much of the West. And now we've seen this comprehensive repudiation of that. You expect that both sides will be reeling as a consequence. It'll be absolutely fascinating now to see, really, first, whether Magyar is able to deliver on this extremely ambitious agenda for change that he is promising to the Hungarian people, but whether he can get their economy back on track. They've had the highest inflation in Europe. Many Hungarians have looked across to countries like Poland and the Baltic states, have been seen how they've been overtaken by them, and really interesting to see now what happens with Hungary's relationship with the rest of Europe, with the EU.
Yeah, also getting some response in from Emmanuel Macron. He actually spoke with Peter Magyar. He says, France salutes the victory of democratic participation of the Hungarian people's attachment to the values of the European Union and for Hungary in Europe. Together, let us advance a more sovereign Europe for the security of our continent, our competitiveness and our democracy.
Yeah, I mean, the big picture here is that ultimately, particularly if you're Emmanuel Macron, who in 2017 won the French presidency for the first time, essentially saying, look, I am for the values of Europe, the European project, liberalism, against things like Brexit in his own country, Le Pen, National Rally. And throughout, the forces that he's been so opposed to have pointed to Hungary as, look, this is our proof of concept. This is how it works. This is our blueprint. And for it to be defeated, and not just defeated, but defeated so strongly, of course, will be a huge sort of boost for him and his morale, how he sees politics. Of course, the big challenge for Macron's politics is what happens next year when his movement has to find a presidential candidate who's not him, who can defeat forces not unlike the forces that we've seen defeated today in Hungary.
And this can mean the release of funds from the EU to Hungary, funds that had been withheld because they suspended them because Brussels thought there was an erosion of democratic standards. So Hungary looks set to prosper further because of this election choice.
Yes, I mean, it really just depends on how quickly they're able to turn the economy around, how quickly they're able to stamp out corruption, or the nationalisation of various industries, and if there's a shift away from that level of state sort of dirigisme in the Hungarian economy. Yes, the fact that these funds are being released does speak to the sense of optimism that is being felt across Europe as a consequence of this. But I think we've just got to see how things play out. I think it's remarkable in some ways that Orban hasn't contested the result of this election. He's spent the last 16 years creating an extremely complex electoral system. He's been accused of gerrymandering, and yet he's still been defeated by this supermajority.
Just slightly distracted by a rendition of We Are the Champions in Budapest there. People celebrating on the streets at this historic election choice. Viktor Orban ending 16 years in power. Now to Ireland, and the government has announced new emergency measures tonight to reduce soaring fuel prices following a week of crippling protests, which also saw a blockade of the country's only oil refinery. Police have clashed with the protesters who brought much of the country to a standstill, with slow-moving convoys blocking roads. Emma Birchley reports.
Enough was enough. After days of disruption over soaring fuel costs, the authorities moved in. But as blockades were cleared at Galway docks, behind closed doors a plan was being finalised by politicians under pressure to act.
Government is now extending the temporary measures to reduce excise duty on petrol, diesel and marked gas oil from the end of May to the end of July, postponing the increase in carbon tax from May until the budget in October, enhancing the transport support schemes for all haulage operators in the country, for local link and school transport providers and some commercial operators.
Added urgency came after Ireland's largest opposition party, Sinn Féin, revealed it planned to call a motion of no confidence in the coalition government over its handling of the crisis. Its leader, Mary Lou MacDonald, posting on Instagram ahead of the meeting, the actions of Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and independents have been disastrous. They've lost the confidence of the public. It's clear that they still are not listening and do not accept the scale of this fuel and cost of living crisis. The protests began on Tuesday with urgent calls from protesters for action to cut fuel costs before businesses go broke. The police, known as the Gardaí, had moved in overnight, escorting a long line of tractors and trucks from the Irish capital, prompting fury with calls for backing from those TDs, the equivalent of MPs, who should understand what's at stake.
How could a rural TD or any independent go back to their constituency after this thing and see what was done to the farmers and the truckers and the builders of Revenue Via? I can't believe I'm still in shock.
By morning, the main thoroughfare through Dublin was blocked once more, and a rolling roadblock on the N7 brought another day of delays for motorists. At Whitegate Oil Refinery, tankers were back on the move, escorted by Gardaí after a major operation on Saturday to clear tractors that blocked the entrance, ready to restock filling stations that have run dry. The package of support will cost around £440 million to deliver, and it won't please everyone, but it's hoped it'll be enough to get things moving. Emma Birchley, Sky News.
So, Stephen, a package of support, about £440 million, but that's on top of £218 million that had been promised three weeks ago. Is it enough?
Look, the thing which links this story with everything else we've discussed is ultimately the big problem here is that energy has just got more expensive because it's more scarce because of the war in Iran. And I think the problem for all politicians across the democratic world is if you don't intervene to support households, then you see protests of the kind that we've seen in Ireland. But if you do intervene to support households by masking the very real price shock that has been caused by Donald Trump's war in Iran, well, then you're still going to experience the demand destruction and the adverse consequences of not having enough energy to meet your needs. It's just you're no longer even able to harness the useful market mechanisms to make sure that the economy adjusts and adapts to that in the most efficient and effective way. And you then end up caught in this cycle as a government where you're continually going, oh, well, we'll just have to spend more money or borrow more money in order to shield households and businesses from this problem. Whereas ultimately, what people need to get relief on their energy bills is an end to the war in Iran. And there is no button and you can press if you're the head of the Irish government, head of the British government, head of the French government. And I think, the problem they've all got themselves into is they've all talked as if there is a button they can press, and that has created unrealistic and unhelpful expectations for them.
Annabelle, do you think we might see the British government in a similar position? Could we see protests on the streets here also?
Well, I think it just depends how long this conflict goes on for. Labour at the moment really seem to be burying their heads in the sand. They've talked a bit about targeted support coming down the line. They've absolutely categorically ruled out something like the energy price guarantee that was brought in by Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng in the autumn of 2022. But Stephen is absolutely right that the fundamental problem is people are becoming completely conditioned to this idea that any time they face any kind of economic financial hardship, the government will step in and support them. And the other problem, which Stephen has spoken to, is that what we ultimately want, if energy is becoming more scarce, is for people to consume less of it. And if the government is subsidising people's use, you're not going to see that self-rationing. Now, I'm not advocating rationing of any form, but unfortunately, that's the situation that we find ourselves in. We need people to be using less of this. Otherwise, we're simply storing up more and more problems for the future. I doubt that we're going to see protests on the streets. Ireland, for a start, has got more expensive fuel than we have here in the UK. Taxes on fuel are even higher there than they are here, and here it makes up about half of what you pay at the pump. And I suspect that the government will make some of the right noises in the coming weeks and the coming months in terms of providing the support that people are clamouring for. But in Ireland, what they ultimately want are price caps, and price caps are counterproductive. That's the last thing that they should be considering introducing.
But the protests have been extremely disruptive. The Irish Police Commissioner saying that the blockades that we saw yesterday are not a legitimate form of protest, and there have been rumours that this could bring the Irish government down. But we shall see. Should we take a break? Coming up next, we'll take a first look at what's making the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers. Do stay with us if you can.